Thanks very much, Sarah. Everybody can hear me okay? I've just been saying to Pat that whenever I was invited to this conversation, to conduct this conversation with him and with yourselves, I started reading up about him and listening to him on YouTube and, finding out what I could. And I've said to him just now, it's like finding out that you have a neighbour who knows everything and you never knew the neighbour knew everything. I mean, he's only from Cork and I'm totally delighted we have him here this evening. And I would say to you, after this evening or today, have a look at his work. You'll find it on the internet and also YouTube interviews. Fascinating man. He's sitting beside us. I'm going to read a few words from his bio that Sarah gave me. Pat trained in medicine, psychiatry and philosophy in Ireland and the UK. He was a professor of philosophy, diversity and mental health at the University of Central Lancashire. He works to promote the expertise of people with lived experience of mental health conditions. And he's an advocate of the recovery approach in mental health care. He calls himself a critical psychiatrist and was one of the founders of the Critical Psychiatry Network. He was co-editor of the book Rethinking the Trauma of War with Dr. Celia Petty. Also, he's the author of Trauma, Culture, Meaning and Philosophy, published in 2002. With Phil Thomas, he published Post-Psychiatry, a New Direction for Mental Health. We could have Pat here for a course on community care, but we're going to have him here for a conversation. And Pat, as I said to you, I'd like to start with something that everybody in the room is aware of, and many people in the room will have experienced, and that's the stigma of ill health, of mental ill health. Can you talk to us about why is that the case, that there's a stigma to mental ill health?
First of all, thank you very much for your generous introduction and for Fergal and Sarah for inviting me up and for Jake for giving me a wonderful tour of West Belfast this morning. Stigma, yeah, you started with an easy one. I don't know why there is so much stigma around mental health, but as someone who's been working in the field for over 40 years, I started in mental health 40 years ago, I can honestly say that I think it's probably the biggest challenge that actually people face. It's one thing having some kind of mental health struggle in your life, that's come into your life, you're struggling with it and trying to manage it. But then to face rejection, to face marginalization, to face discrimination when it comes to things like employment, and that is a huge burden, probably even a greater burden for many people than the original problem that the person had in the first place. I don't know exactly why it's why mental health is so stigmatized, and I think we're starting to move in the right direction. Meetings like this, discussions like this, I think are beginning to kind of, challenge that to some extent. What I do feel, though, is that some of the anti-stigma campaigns that I've seen in the UK and elsewhere, and in Ireland, over the past 20 years, I do wonder about the direction they've got, which is about saying mental illness is just like diabetes, or it's just like having a broken leg. If you go to your doctor, you get a diagnosis and you get it fixed. So it should be on the same level as, diabetes or something that you take a medication for, and once you take it, you stay well and you shouldn't face discrimination. And that, to me, while it sounds positive in one sense, is overly simplistic. And I think it does lead to a kind of notion of mental illness being something to do with a broken brain, because just as if you have diabetes, you have something wrong with your pancreas, you're not producing enough insulin. And it also makes the solutions, I think, it carves out a particular direction for what the solutions are, and that's usually pharmacological. So it's interesting that you see in a lot of the anti-stigma campaigns that are based on that kind of medical model often receive substantial funding from pharma, because it's in their interests to sell the idea that mental illness is something simple that you just take a drug for, and if people were only sensible and kept taking their drugs according to what their doctor said, there wouldn't be any problems. What I see much more effective and much more positive is to move away from that kind of idea and to start, and one of the things that I've been interested in is to start exploring the links between struggles with mental illness and human creativity and innovation. And much as in Siobhan's beautiful poem, which we just heard to open, was that message that actually out of our struggles with mental health, what we conventionally call mental illness or mental health problems, that's where a lot of human creativity emerges from. And actually the people we most look up to in terms of the creative arts, in philosophy, in innovative thinking. I'm thinking of people like Vincent van Gogh, for instance. Munch, the painter who did the Scream. In fact, most of the great artists of the 20th century, a lot of the novelists of the 20th century, a lot of the philosophers of the last couple of hundred years that we draw on for inspiration and new thinking, actually, what do they have in common? A hell of a lot of them struggled at some stage in their life with major mental health issues. And to me, there is something that links our creativity as human beings with what we call mental health problems. And to me, if we start to link those kind of things, we start to see mental health struggles in a different light, not as something purely negative to be zapped with drugs or ECT or put away in hospitals or not talked about. But actually, if we can start to be much more positive about, and that might sound strange for anyone who's struggled with depression or with psychosis or with suicide, and I don't mean it flippantly, but I do mean it that we start to see that out of adversity, out of difficulties, out of reaching the depths sometimes, we actually are exploring what it means to be a human being in this world around us. And to me, that's where I would talk about anti-stigma work going, in that much more kind of positive exploration of what we're struggling with as human beings when we talk about mental health, rather than the "you've got a broken brain, keep taking the tablets" message that I think is too often informs a lot of the anti-stigma campaigns. So I've not answered your question at all, but it's a few thoughts that come to mind.
No, on the contrary, Pat, I think you've answered the question really well. Where the stigma comes from, we don't know, but there is some idea that, if you've got diabetes, that's not your fault, but if you have a mental health problem, that's maybe your fault, and maybe you should conceal it. So it's that kind of experience that a lot of us will have of not mentioning or not talking about or not owning up to the fact that we've had mental health struggles. So what you've said about struggles in life being the source of creativity, I find really heartening. Yeah. The other thing, just on that issue of responsibility, of, if you like, where it comes from, what comes to mind, Eilish, when you were saying that was, I've worked a lot in
worked in Bradford for 7-8 years in the inner city area in Bradford in West Yorkshire, which is a largely Pakistani Muslim community and largely came from Mirpur and a fairly small area of Pakistan. A lot of the immigrants who came to work in the mills when, they did the night shifts in the mills because the local Bradfordians didn't want to do that. So there was a big immigration from Pakistan came in the 60s and into the 70s and that. And those were very traditional communities because they came from villages. They came en masse. Whole families came. And so when I was working there, it was back I moved to Bradford in 95. We were working with those communities, and very often the mental health problems were put down to not something individual, but it was a jinn or it was a spirit. It was some kind of supernatural thing that was bothering the person.
Yeah.
And while, again, the kind of traditional approach to that was to educate people that it wasn't a spirit, it wasn't jinns or whatever, and to tell them that actually it's a mental illness, it's something to do with your brain. And that immediately when I started working with people from that community, that just didn't sit right with me, that I wasn't sure where mental health problems came from, and I couldn't hand on heart say something wrong with your brain, it might be something happened in the family or whatever. And to me, culturally, what the spiritual explanation was doing, it was locating the source of the problem not in the individual, but outside of the individual. And I saw this in Africa as well, in African communities. And often when a traditional healer or religious person would come, their pronouncements would be that there was a disturbance in the family spirit world and that certain sacrifices had to be done to make that right. Your auntie so-and-so who died 10 years ago, you're not doing proper kind of honoring of her at her anniversary, and you've got to do something about that. Or something else has happened that's now causing a disturbance in this generation, in this person. And so the prescription would be to kill a chicken or do certain rites or do something. And it often struck me, both in an African context and in the context of working with the Pakistani community at that time, that actually made a lot of sense, because what it did was that it did take away responsibility from the individual. If a spirit came into you and made you a bit mad for a while, well, then the spirit could go out of you again and you were fine. Whereas if you got a diagnosis of schizophrenia from someone like me, that you're stuck with that for the rest of your life. And everybody will see that and know that. And it also struck me that in terms of dealing with the problem, it was bringing the family together, and it was bringing in uncles and aunties, and it was saying, you've got to do something, you've got, And so what we tried to do is to kind of work with the local healers and have conversations with families that weren't just about, oh, you've got a mental illness, these are the tablets you have to take. We had to do that sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying it was all simple and straightforward. But I think we were trying to work with a respectful way towards something that that actually led to less stigma in a funny way sometimes for the individual. Now, I'm not trying to glamorize traditional cultures. Often people are stigmatized and marginalized. I'm not trying to say everything is fine in local African villages or in Pakistani communities. But everything isn't fine in Western cultures either, and everything isn't fine with the way we respond either. So I think we need a bit more respect for how other cultures deal with both mental illness and the stigma issue and the responsibility issue. It's more complex than just we will educate you how to think rightly about mental health, as though we've got some kind of great history of treating people, with all the respect that they deserve.
Yeah. Thank you. You've mentioned Bradford, but you did a lot of work internationally, and you worked in post-conflict societies. traumatised societies, Pat. Could you tell us, first of all, why you accepted invitations or why you went to different places, and what you learned whenever you were there, what you brought back with you?
Okay, how long have we got?
Well, we're going to turn to the audience shortly, don't worry.
Second. Just, there's a grey Volkswagen, if anybody owns it, it's blocking the entrance. If anybody here is parked, they don't have the car reg, a grey Volkswagen? No?
I'm going to invite the song and poem before the break. Okay.
What got me into work tonight? Well, a little bit about my own situation. I studied medicine to become a psychiatrist, which might sound crazy, but I've always, even from very early age, I've been fascinated by madness, and I think attracted to the idea of people who saw the world differently or experienced it differently or who struggled with the reality, because I think I struggled with it in my own way. And I wanted to work always kind of I knew from an early age I wanted to work somehow in this area, and so I did medicine to get a ticket to work with people with mental health issues. So I ended up I qualified as a doctor in 1982 and went straight, as I said, into mental health work in 1983, and bang, I came, up against kind of psychiatry in Cork in the early 80s. Wasn't a very creative place. And I started to study philosophy the same time as I was studying psychiatry at night in UCC. And after doing psychiatry for 3 years and passing the exams and stuff, I said, I've had enough of this. The contradiction for me between caring for people and controlling people as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, using coercive interventions with people, I just kind of said, I had enough of this. I want out. So I decided to leave and to just pursue a career in doing philosophy, and signed on for that. And then I saw a little ad in the British Medical Journal that all the ads for doctors are at the back of they used to be. It's probably different now in the digitalized world, but at that time, every Friday the BMJ came out, the British Medical Journal, and at the back of that was a supplement with all the jobs you'd look for as a doctor. You'd look for the jobs, and I saw this little ad looking for a psychiatrist to work in Uganda with victims of torture. It was an organization called the Medical Foundation for Care of Victims of Torture. They've now changed their name to Freedom from Torture, and they're a very big organization based in London, but with branches all around the UK. I don't know if they're here in Northern Ireland as well.
Haven't heard of it.
Yeah, but at that time they were just a very, very small, tiny organization, headed up by a woman, Helen Bamber, who went on to found another organization called the Helen Bamber Foundation. But there was just Helen and another woman working for them at that time, and they got money from Amnesty International to set up a project in Uganda, because Uganda was kind of synonymous in the 80s with torture and violence against communities. You'll all have heard of Idi Amin and the fairly notorious kind of violence that went with his regime. What a lot of people don't know is that after Amin, the regime of Milton Obote, who came after him, was probably even worse. And in the early 80s, a lot of Uganda had been laid waste, and people talked about what were called the killing fields of Uganda to the northwest of the capital, Kampala. They reckon about 500,000 people were killed there, and just bodies left. It was horrendous. And that notion of the killing fields came from Cambodia, where something similar happened under the Pol Pot regime. So that Amnesty International had been criticizing Uganda for a long time. And the regime of the current president, Museveni, came in 1986, and they wanted to do something positive, so they gave some money to the Medical Foundation to set up a project for people who had been tortured there. And it was originally supposed to be based in Nairobi with refugees from Uganda. But then the new regime, Museveni's regime, seemed positive about human rights, so they decided to set it up in Kampala. And I responded to the ad and got on well with Helen, and I was recruited and went out there. And it was, I met my current wife, my only wife, Joan Giller. She was...
glad to hear.
She was the other doctor who was recruited, and there was a Ugandan social worker. And it was probably the most ill-thought-out project in human history to send these young white doctors out into the middle of what was a war zone, effectively, and set up a project to treat people who would be tortured. And we very quickly said, Joan and I looked at each other and we said, we can't do a lot here, but we could do a lot of harm. Yeah. We could do actually a lot of harm, because at that time, Uganda society was on its knees. Everything was broken. It was a mess. There was still fighting all over the place. I had my car stolen at gunpoint. I was hijacked, and that was a common enough kind of thing to happen. But what we saw, was that actually people were getting on with things as well. People were, we went to visit various villages, and what struck me was when you went there and we asked people, how can we help? They didn't ask you for psychotherapists, or they didn't ask you for a psychiatric clinic, or antidepressants. They said, can you help us to get the school going again?
Yeah.
Can you help us to get the markets going again so we can start trading? Can you help us with the roads are terrible? Can you help us, so that people can get in and out, stuff like that. And so the idea of going into a situation like that and setting up some kind of psychotherapeutic program just didn't seem a lot of sense, So we kind of said, actually, if we start to do that, what then that'll be seen as the solution from outside, which we didn't feel any great confidence in Western psychiatry as having any great answers. So we spent a lot of time struggling with it and meeting with local organizations, and we said we'd try and support those organizations who were doing things. One of the areas that we did feel we could help was with women who had been raped, who suffered rape, because that was one area that there wasn't. There was silence around that. And so we helped to form a group that got women together and just kind of created a safe space where they could talk about what happened. And that continued for a number of years. And one of the interesting things was that they didn't want psychotherapy. They created a cultural group that they started to write plays and musical kind of shows about what had happened in the war and how everyone had suffered and how the women had suffered. And they wanted to express that and talk about it. They also created a little economic revolving fund whereby they supported one another to buy some livestock or to develop their income, basically, to support their families. So the efforts that came out of that were very practical, cultural, but in the context of doing that, yes, they talked about what had happened. Yes, they spoke about it.
Of course.
Yes, they shared experiences. But the talking wasn't put center stage as we would do with traditional psychotherapeutic approaches, where we say to people, you've got to come away into a room with me and talk over and over about what happened to you. Decontextualized, away from your family, away from your friends. And so it really spoke to me about the importance of community and about us as mental health people learning from what resources people had themselves. And I can remember if you go anywhere in Africa, but particularly Uganda at that time, at night is when things, in the early evening, when all the markets start to come up, and people would be selling their goods, with little candles and stuff, and everybody comes out and buys things and chats and talks and has a drink and whatever. I can remember, walking through one of the markets one evening and kind of thinking, the idea that me as a white Western guy trained in a university over in Ireland has anything to teach these people about talking to each other is nonsense, you know. That seemed to me to be an outrageous idea, and whoever dreamt that up kind of was, you know. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I think I got more, and Joan, we learned more from Ugandan people about dealing with torture, with genocidal violence, and how to move beyond that. We learned certainly more than anything that we did, and it was a huge learning experience for me. So basically, you asked me how I got into that work, so that's how I did it. Yeah.
Thank you, Pat. There are people in the room who have experience of working in the field of mental health issues and post-trauma. And I'll come to you just very shortly. Before I do, I think we have a singer in the room. Am I right? I just would like to introduce Sinead, is it? Quinn?
Brendan.
Brendan. Sorry, Brendan. Sorry, Brendan. I'll get. Thank you. Yes, I've got it.
I seem to share life. It's worrying all the time. Battlefield like the sun. Be yourself all the time. Smelling all this time. Broken dreams and shattered lives. Swirling inside. We got no place to lie. We're on one side. Everything seems so right. So one time, it's so right. Look around, the world is shine. Find peace that you that you need. So let the evening sun we got all this to hide. If everyone side everything seems alright. So long time, it's alright. Look around the world will shine. Better times tonight. Everything seems alright. So long time, it's alright.
Thank you, Jim.
Excellent. Well
Thank
done.
you. Can I call on Sean Fitzsimmons for a poem, please?
Section runs. Thank you, Brendan. That was brilliant. This wee poem's called Hope. And I think hope, if you can give it to anybody, is the most important thing fighting their own inner battles with mental health. I think I listened to one of Pat's talks and he was talking about hope. I think you're on the journey on your own, but if someone can hold the torch of hope, then and eventually it can light your flame, then that's it. So I want to inspire hope through my poetry. So here it is. I remember days when I would sit and contemplate my past, lost in so much darkness, thinking I would never last. But every day I'd wake up, I'd find some hope and fight, until the day I looked inside and I found the gift to write. So how can I say it, portray it on a beat? Yes, I am that little boy that roamed them Belfast streets, kissing up the alleys, hopping buses like young frogs, a case of beer, a barrack, and them alleys turned to bogs. The smell of piss, a lumber, tough streets but full of crack. These streets were made to break a man, so be careful looking back. Looking back on my past, I'll state it loud and clear. Surviving in the shadows, it filled me full of fear. Fear became my master, self-violence was a choice, until the day I realized I had a fucking voice. All of us have choices, be them choices hard. All of us have paths to take back to them shining stars. As I was surviving, dreams showed me I could thrive. Life became so hard sometimes, them dreams kept me alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you folks now. If anybody's got a comment to make, observation from what you've heard or from your own work, or a question to ask Pat, who's going to be the brave person to kick us off? Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was really inspiring.
What I'll do is I'll do the roving mic as well.
Thanks very much. I was always looking at your voice, but I can go. I really inspired looking at the work that you're doing. And one of the things that struck me, you would say it's simple, but you know how simple this is. when someone has a disturbance or a feeling, whatever, they immediately go to a GP. Now, that's where I think the problem starts, because the GP then will go down again a path of medication. Would it be appropriate that there would be a different scenario where someone would set out to be medical man and eventually the drugs man, that we would have a similar setup for people who would be going through issues of disturbance, should we call it. And the other thing is, in my ex-survey, I think we're not being taught about the human experience, because the human experience does embrace down things as well as up things, especially for young people. We're seeing now in another land that over the last 10 years, there's an increase of 65% of young people on age 18 being prescribed antidepressants. So I just wonder what your thoughts on the definition from medical to as an initial, second medical.
Yeah, I mean, I think your analysis is very correct. I mean, I think that is, if you like, the script at the moment. If someone starts to talk about suffering with anxiety, depression, suicidality, eating problems, voices, whatever it is that we conventionally lump into this territory of human struggles we call mental illness or mental health or whatever, then it usually is go and get a diagnosis, go to the GP and get a diagnosis. And I think I'm not at all, I mean, I have the huge respect for GPs, and I think actually GPs do a hell of a lot better with many people than mental health services do. And I've seen many people who have had tremendous support at primary care level from general practice. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, a GP has 15 minutes, max, to see someone. And very often they're under pressure, and very often their algorithms, if you like, in training is if you have, 5 symptoms of depression, that's low mood, someone's not sleeping, they're maybe off their food for a bit, they're feeling down, low energy or whatever. Well, you get those symptoms, that means the person's depressed, and the first thing is very often an antidepressant, or that comes along very quickly, at least in that script, in that way of looking at things. And I think GPs probably would be very happy, I would imagine, if there was an alternative streaming, because I think the GPs I talk to don't like that. They see how inadequate that is. They see that it's very different dealing with mental health issues than dealing with dermatology. Someone comes in with a rash or something, you can go through 4 or 5 different scenarios for that and come up with a cream, and you can do that in 15 minutes generally and bring the person back and see if it's working next week, and that's generally appropriate. With mental health issues, it's not like that, and it's, often you don't know, like if someone says I'm suffering with anxiety or whatever, there's often a context for that. There's often a situation, a much wider context. It doesn't come out of the air, just, and GPs don't have the space, by and large, to get into that. And that's why I kind of think meeting like this in a community, we're all people here who've kind of thought about this stuff a lot. A lot of us have been through these issues, struggled with them. Could we not come up with a better script around how we respond to people? Does it have to be that, your first step is a GP? I'm not saying that we rule that out at all, or that we shouldn't access. I'm a doctor, and I'm very passionate about medicine having a role to play in the lives of people who are struggling. But I think medicine needs to have a very different role to what it has at the moment. I kind of think it should be like the role of the doctor when it comes to mental health issues is like the role of a doctor on a football team. You know, you're there to support people and to give advice and to deal with what, you know, broken bones or whatever that come off, and maybe give some advice on health and diet and whatever, because you have genuine medical knowledge that's relevant to the territory. But we wouldn't put doctors picking the team, or we wouldn't put doctors coming up with the strategy for the football match that's coming up next week. We'd want people who were pretty experienced at playing the game and doing that kind of stuff, who can draw on doctors if they want. But we wouldn't put doctors just because they have an MB or a qualification. It wouldn't be that we automatically said, you have to have a doctor as a manager of a football team. And I think that's kind of what we've done with mental health. And it's purely for historical reasons we've done that, because every psychiatric hospital had to have a clinical director or a doctor in charge. And that goes back historically to a time when doctors were still dunking people in cold water and spinning people on chairs and bloodletting. So it wasn't that it was doctors' knowledge that made them in charge of hospitals, it was their social standing and status. But that's continued down into our generation. So we still centralize the medical profession in terms of decision making along the paths that we take with mental health issues. And as I say, as a community, can't we not think up of some different scripts? And I think that's the point you were making, is that we should have a range of alternatives in our communities. And I think we're smart enough now, and we know enough about community organization. We know, and from the poem, what's actually, we know what gets people better when it comes to mental health issues, by and large, from the recovery research. It's about the generation of hope. It's about finding meaning. It's finding human solidarity. It's feeling empowered is what gets us better. That's what gets us out of depression, is when we start to feel hopeful again. It's what helps you to manage your anxiety, is when you feel empowered. You feel, I'm not run over by this, I actually feel strong enough to deal with it. How do you feel strong? Well, you feel that through how people respond to you. You feel it by feeling in charge of your own body. That's through exercise, through work, through creativity, through achieving things. All of those are kind of things that a doctor isn't going to give you. You're not going to get them in a surgery. So they're things that we as a community can start to say, how do we deliver those things to people who are struggling? And that's what I think is a different script around mental health, when we start to think in that way. And I don't have any easy answer for that. That's up to the community to come up with those ideas. But I know how little medicine has to offer as the decision makers along the routes. That's my role as a critical psychiatry, is actually to start pointing out how little you're going to get from all these medical appointments in the end. So I think it's a spot on. Your question is spot on, and I hope I've addressed it in some way.
Thank you, Pat. 2 questions here, and if anybody wants, if you'd raise your hand if you want to follow up, and then I'll go back up to Pat and continue with the conversation. Thank you.
Hello, sorry. My name is Regina. I'm new. I left Northern Ireland over 40 years ago, just went back. I currently work with Hertfordshire County Council, but I work in the community sector. And just listening exactly what that lady has just said about going to GPs, and I know some years ago they came up with the community navigators who were based at the GP surgeries, and they help navigate people coming in with mental health issues. People that would say, repeat offenders, always go to the GP for something or other. And they started to look at that and address it, and then they'd have a community navigator or a number to call in the surgery. And I live in currently work with some of the other projects that we have that are funded by the European Social Fund or the state funding to do with getting people back into work that are furthest from the job market. And people there, I don't know about here, but they'll send them thinking, right, they come from DWP, send them to go to work, and you listen, and they're not ready for work. There's a lot more there with mental health issues, and the links in with ADHD, it may be autism, neurodiversity conditions, there's so many things there. Disabling people, what we said about trying to do was talks with surgeries, with community navigators, how you can poster, how you can navigate people around the area where they live and search for help within. So I'm here to listen to see what is here in a very similar field and how can we direct people to about understanding the new script, what's in place, what could be in place, linking to GP surgeries, any activists or any way that we could help navigate people to who to go to and what's in place here to do that.
Thank you.
My question is quite connected to yours actually. Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Claire Louise. I have a master's degree in counselling and that doesn't qualify me to be a counsellor, so I have to do another degree to get my 100 hours. I'm a massive advocate for creative therapies and my experience in trying to study such a thing in Northern Ireland has been quite dire. Music therapy can't be studied here, you have to go overseas. Art therapy is, last time I spoke to them, they're not sure if they're going to run the course.
Really?
So if I wanted to be a creative therapist, I asked the question to my tutor recently, what can I do to be a creative therapist? He didn't know. So I wrote to the ACP and I asked them, what can I do to be a creative therapist? And they said, well, you can do a master's degree in each individual art therapy, music therapy, play therapy. You can pay thousands and thousands of pounds to become that. So there's no generic creative therapist that seems to exist. And if you want to be that in this country, you can't, you have to go overseas. So there's a lot of limitations to people who want to help in a creative way. I just wanted to point that out and ask, what can we do to change that in our wee country and try to make more people facilitated to help others in a creative way? If that makes sense.
Thank you, Pat. Is it okay if I take it two more?
Yeah.
Someone up here? Is there someone up here? Yes.
My name is Brenda. I've been involved with social building community gardens. And one of it was during COVID. And we took some waste around and we built a small community garden with some of the people whose backers on the way onto it. So we physically changed the landscape. It's been more than 3 years, and what we've noticed is people will come in, they're starting to come in a bit more, they're a bit nervous. But what we've noticed is the connectivity. Some people have said that they've met neighbours they never spoke to, even though they've lived beside for years. And we've seen the disconnection from people who's driven a sense of isolation and loneliness. I once read an article by Dr. Glór, and he said, one of the problems we're having is the disconnection with nature, and we're not supposed to live this way. So what we're trying to do is, we're trying to run programs from our little space. It's very, very working class, it's only 10 minutes from here. But it's not so much, it's more about how to teach people how to grow their own, how to get people to stay together, to grow together, to build more of a little productive community. And then I read something I've never heard about it. It's called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And when I looked at it, and I saw you need certain things in your life so that you can survive and also grow. We're being affected by, for me, consumption. People are being told that you have to have a certain type of TV, drive a certain car, your heart has not to look a certain way before you are worthwhile. And I feel that that has been into the widespread depression and feelings of inadequacy that people have. And that everything affects mental health. Your self-worth is dictated by your material possessions.
Yeah.
And we have little chats in the garden sometimes. Recently, a mum came in and said, I need a new TV, this one's not big enough. And I said, well, what's wrong with it? And we had this conversation. And by the time she left, she decided she wasn't going to buy a TV. So, I'm sorry, I'm not being very specific. It's a wider thing. I'm only speaking about what I know. Do we have to start moving in the way people think as a community on where their self-worth is built? But do we also tie that into a clean environment, something where you're front when you're stepping out into your street, you're seeing something which is a bit more visually reassuring? And do we start looking at I believe we start from within your own community, but we have to address the wider scale of where does our self-worth come from, and how do we find that little connection that builds a community from the ground up, and is it literally starting to grow peas and things?
Done.
Thank you very much. Last one, Pat, over here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jennifer. Just in response to everybody's asked a question that seems like them with that, I'm a social prescriber for mental health. So instead of a pharmacological prescription, I socially prescribe, which connects people with different groups and local resources in their communities. For instance, I'm based in the southeastern coast area. I work on a project called Southeast Mind Matters, and I would have a lot of referrals coming from the multidisciplinary teams within the Down locality. I don't think MDGs have been rolled out in the surgeries anywhere else yet. So within the MDG, you have the practice physio, a mental health practitioner, the social worker, the nurse practitioner, etc. And they would refer through to me cases where people need quick access to counselling. The project that I'm working on was literally funded for 2 years, and that will conclude in March. But over the last sort of 18 months or so, I have had an overwhelming response from families looking for sort of a holding space, if you like, for awaiting diagnosis for their children for neurodivergent conditions. Also people who have been through trauma. I am very much like to work from a trauma-informed, through a trauma-informed lens, and a lot of our counsellors and psychotherapists have the same training. We have seen a lot of people who have experienced the traumas, different traumas in life, capital T traumas and small T traumas. But what I have seen, particularly for me, in the place where I work in South Down and Down Patrick, I have personally had 156 people and families who have been helped by that project. And it's about linking people in with, for instance, the ADHD Help in Newcastle, the family support in Downpatrick for autism. It's very much about that community connection. And I think that's what people are talking about. And the GPs in my area too have referred them to the project. But it's very much the organisation that I work for, it's called Down Rural Community Network. For the last 10 to 15 years, they've been doing very much social prescription. Mine's very specific to the project with mental health. But when you look at it, when it comes down to it, it's all mental health and well-being, and they have horticultural projects, and they run and help people get finance for different community groups. So it's all about communities, people working together, and peer support. People who've been through similar situations, similar mental health issues, coming together and supporting each other and giving each other advice.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Pat.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most of what people are saying is very much in tune with what my own experience of things. I think what I've seen over the years working with many different individuals and families is the diversity of, if you like, pathways that help people to get out of being stuck. I mean, I see people, when you've got a mental health issue, whatever it is, people can get very stuck in their lives and can feel that there's no way forward. How am I going to get beyond whatever it is, feeling so depressed or in a psychotic state or suicidal thoughts or whatever it is? That feeling of being stuck is dreadful. It's horrible. And there's no minimization in my mind of that. I've sat with many people but how to help someone to move on from being stuck is the challenge for mental health work. And what I've learned is that while medication can help people, and I'm not anti-medication, I've certainly seen people benefit from that. It's a relatively small number of people, I think, where that's going to be the primary thing that helps them get it. Therapy, actual individual therapy, is also very helpful for a lot of people. It can be very helpful. But again, it's not for everyone, and sometimes it's only one part of the solution for someone to move on. And so people need a range of different things. One of the things, and they're all there, we're all doing them, from community gardens to one of the things I see a lot now is people going cold water swimming. And the sense of empowerment that people get from that is huge. If you can go in the middle of winter, take your clothes off, go into the sea and come out, wow, all your troubles are gone for that while you focus on getting your body in and out and getting warm again. And the sense of achievement, I think, that comes with that. And usually, largely it's women that I see down where we are in West Cork. It's largely women in groups who go cold water swimming, and they have the crack, and I know a couple of people in particular who've been recently bereaved, have been really down and stuck with the low mood and sadness that comes with bereavement, who've been really helped by that sense of getting something in your life that you feel, I've done, I've managed, I've moved on, I've got something that I'm in control of. And if you do that in a context where you can share it with other people and you can share their struggles, because we all have struggles with our kids, with our own lives, with everything. If you can share that space, well, that to me can be a pathway for people to move forward. It might not be the full thing, but it's part of it. Employment is so important for people. Housing is crucial for people. There's nothing, when you see people being rendered homeless, that's crushing. And if you're already struggling with issues like depression or anxiety in your life, and then you're struggling with bloody well, where are you going to live? And I work now, most of my work at the moment is with asylum seekers down in Ireland, and it's breaking my heart to hear of the struggles through being put on the street, because in the south, we're now saying to asylum seekers, we don't have accommodation. So young people are turning up after horrendous journeys and thinking they've reached somewhere safe, and then they're told by the IPAS office, the International Protection Office, we don't have anywhere for you to sleep. You'll have to sleep in a sleeping bag on the street. It's crushing for people, I think, and the sense of anxiety and everything that comes with that. So I'm saying that just to say that the things that help us move on are diverse. They're as diverse as we are as human beings. And what helps us to become unstuck are a range of things that we all have in our communities, from music to poetry, cold water swimming, but they're also about jobs and housing and human rights and access to things that we all need as human beings, and prioritizing them and seeing those things as associated with a mental health agenda that community groups can do, rather than it just being go to your GP if you're depressed and get pills. That's our only script around mental health. If we can start to change that and make the focus on that range of things that actually we know through empirical scientific work what gets people better, then I think we will start to make progress.
Thank you.